Professor Koester believes there may be an even more direct link between the traditions of Thomas and Jesus himself. The gospel found at Nag Hammadi begins, "These are the secret words which the living Jesus spoke and which the twin Judas Thomas wrote down."
In Aramaic, Thomas means twin. Thus, the original name of this apostle was Judas the twin. Now, the Gospel of Thomas says that this Judas Thomas was the brother of Jesus. If one looks at another New Testament writing, the so-called Epistle of Jude, one reads in the beginning, Jude, that is Judas, the servant of Jesus Christ, and a brother of James. This James is certainly James, brother of the Lord. In a later writing from Syria, the Acts of Thomas, this apostle is actually called the twin brother of Jesus. We have no way of verifying that statement, but there is no reason to doubt that this Judas Thomas was indeed the brother of Jesus.
From the confusion that characterized early Christianity, three main strands had emerged. Jewish Christianity, centered on Jerusalem; Gentile Christianity in Asia Minor and Greece; and Gnostic Christianity in Egypt and parts of Syria. Which of these would develop into Christianity as we now know it would not be clear for a further 200 years. In 66 AD, the bitter resentment long felt by the Jews against the Romans erupted into one of history's most violent conflicts. Jews revolted against the Roman occupation, and in retaliation, the Romans swept into Jerusalem, sacked the temple, and destroyed the city. The revolt lasted 4 years. In all, 1.5 million Jews died in the conflict. With its base destroyed, the Jewish Christian Church lost its influence and slowly disappeared from history. By this time, Gentile and Gnostic Christianity were firmly established in the Mediterranean world. With Jerusalem in ruins, the focus for the new religion switched to Rome, capital of the Western world. It was here that Christianity as we know it was forged. Paul ended his mission in Rome, and church tradition suggests Peter also came here. Peter started as a Jewish Christian, but many scholars believe he gradually moved toward the Gentile church, perhaps in Antioch, where he's said to have gone as a missionary. The great church of St. Peter in Rome was built on the site of a 4th century basilica erected by the Emperor Constantine on the traditional site of Peter's tomb. But there was little direct evidence for the tradition, or indeed that Peter ever went to Rome, until 1949, when a collection of bones were found under the dome of St. Peter's. Professor Gilles Quispel from Utrecht is a leading international authority on early church history.
This is where the bones were found. They were immediately hailed as the bones of St. Peter himself, but that is, frankly, highly improbable. But what is interesting is that a monument with pillars was found above the bones. And a report from Rome in the 2nd century tells us that this monument stood above the relics of St. Peter. Clearly, Constantine knew about this monument because he built the high altar of the original Basilica of St. Peter just above this spot. Now it seems to me that this 2nd century monument, together with Constantine's recognition of it, is evidence of a very strong tradition that Peter came here to organize the church in Rome and was martyred here.
Before the end of the 1st century, the Roman Church had become Gentile. The Jewish war had made this almost inevitable. In the year 89, Judaism finally excluded the Christian sect from the synagogues. There's no evidence of a Gnostic presence in Rome at this time, but the Gnostic Christians had flourished elsewhere, particularly in the East. By the middle of the 2nd century, they were the most successful Christian sect within the empire. The spread of Gnosticism was a great embarrassment to the Roman Church, which had already begun to see itself as the only church worthy of universal or Catholic appeal. Even more embarrassing, the Gnostics were beginning to claim as their hero and mentor the Apostle Paul, some of whose writings were open to Gnostic interpretation. Eventually, the Gnostic Christians also came to Rome. Traces of their presence are scarce. But here, tucked away in this Roman suburb, an interesting discovery was made just a few years ago.
This is the Aureliae Catacombs. When it was discovered, frescoes were still clearly visible. Due to somewhat uncharacteristic neglect, they faded away almost completely. Fortunately, there are still enough details to be seen for me to explain what they represent and their significance. That is Jesus as the good shepherd with his flock. Note the circle around it. This probably denotes the spiritual world of the Gnostics. In that case, this would be a Gnostic catacomb, the only non-Catholic catacomb anywhere. And that is Paul, whom the Gnostics regarded as the apostle. The Catholics of the time called Paul the apostle of the heretics.
It now appears that within a short time of their arrival, the Gnostics came to outnumber other Christians even in Rome. And yet today, virtually no trace of them remains. Somehow, Gnosticism lost the battle. To understand why they disappeared,